Hello and welcome to the Polyglot Bookshelf Year in Review, how my year of reading went. So I started this year with a simple goal, and I didn't have this channel then. I wanted to get back into reading regularly. It's a habit I love, but I'd kind of fallen out of. So I set the goal of reading 24 books, or 2 a month. That's not much, but I'm a slow reader in Portuguese still, and I knew that would be the main language I would be reading in. So how did I do? I read 39 books, so success. As I suspected, the vast majority were in Portuguese. However, I read in 4 languages, with a big asterisk on one of those, and I reread 3 books in translation. I listed 10 books as DNF, did not finish, but I didn't start keeping track of my did not finish until later in the year, so there were more. I read in several genres, but literature and nonfiction dominated this year. So let's get into it, starting with languages. So I read in 4 languages, with Portuguese accounting for the majority of the books. I also read a handful of English language books, 1 in Spanish, and 1 in Amazigh. There's a big asterisk on that, though. Amazigh is a North African language spoken by a group of tribes known to the outside world as the Berbers. As with the Roma people and the word gypsies, Berber is a name that was given to them by outsiders, in this case the Greeks. It means barbarians, and is increasingly seen as a slur by people within that community, which is why I'm saying Amazigh instead. So I don't speak Amazigh. I'm interested in it. I was doing some research on it. Unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot of resources available. I'm going to keep searching, but I've got so much going on with my Portuguese that right now that project is on hold. But I did read a very basic book of some vocabulary. So that was that one book. Now, as far as genres, I mostly read literature this year. One of the reasons being that I'm enjoying it right now. So I kind of go back and forth. I read literature, I read science fiction, fantasy, I read genre stuff. I read a wide variety of stuff. But right now I'm enjoying literature. But the other thing is I'm getting familiar with some of the major must-read books in Portuguese and must-read authors. And so that's literature in most cases. I read 2 major Portuguese poets. Reading poetry, especially reading poetry out loud, is a great way to learn the rhythm of a language, since poets consciously play with the sounds and rhythm of words. So I read Everything by Florabella Esperança. Unfortunately, that wasn't that hard. This book is all of her collected sonnets, because unfortunately, her life ended tragically young, and she left only a handful of short sonnet books behind. I also read Mensagem, or Message, by Ferdinand Pessoa, and I will say I read it. I understood most of the words, but very little of the meaning. And that's the downside of reading poetry, especially in a foreign language. It's difficult, very difficult to understand. I'll reread it someday and maybe I'll start to get it. I also read a fair amount of nonfiction. One of my best books of the year is nonfiction, so we'll get back to that. The majority were kind of practical reads that I read for one reason or another, rather than stuff I read for pleasure. So let's start with a couple of my DNF books. One of them I actually blogged about and was positive about in my blog, and that was this one, Chinesey. It's a book about writing in Chinese. And I liked it, and I might come back to it, but it's organized around fun and interesting roots and showing the words that you can get from them, which makes it interesting, but it's not so focused on useful vocabulary. And at my level of Chinese, I need useful vocabulary. So I put it on hold and will maybe come back to it. The second book I don't have to show you because I read it on my Kindle, or I didn't read it on my Kindle since it's on the DNF pile, is a sci-fi classic, The Three-Body Problem by, Lu Xu. It's a classic, but I just couldn't get through it. I loved the beginning, but then it slowed down a lot. Ye Wenji's story was so fascinating to me. And then for some reason, let's jump to the end of her career and make Wang Miao the main character. I don't get it. Also, I think I've simply read too much of this kind of hard science fiction. I used to really like it, but anymore. So like at one point, a character in the game, not just in the book, but in the game that's in the book, figures out how to use a bunch of soldiers to do binary calculations, like a simple computer. Cool, neat idea. Now let's spend several pages describing exactly how it works. Sorry, this is my problem with hard science fiction. These people, both the writers and the readers of that particular genre, and this isn't a judgment thing, this is what those readers want, and I understand, get really into describing how these things work, and I'm just not that interested. So I don't want to give spoilers because I know it's a great classic and you should go read it or try to read it. And if you agree with me, then look up on a Wikipedia what happens. But if you like it, I don't want to blow it for you. But let's just say the premise didn't exactly blow my mind either. So those were my DNF books for the year. Now let's talk about some of the best. Let's start with two books that I've read before in English and this year read in Portuguese. Both held up surprisingly well in translations and were among my favorite reads of the year. Starting with 1984 by George Orwell. Always a classic in any language. Love the book. Another great classic in any language, A História de uma Serva, or The Handmaid's Tale in English, another classic dystopian tale that held up really well in translation. I loved it again. I loved it so much, I've got a tattoo of the saying from the book, which I'll talk about in some other video. My Portuguese literature of the year, which I also read on the Kindle, so I don't have a copy to show you, I think was Ensaio sobre a Cegueira by Jose Saramago. I blogged about that one as well. Maybe I'll put that down in the link below if you want to hear more about that. Blindness is the English translation. And judging, I haven't read the English, but judging from the reviews of the English, I don't think it holds up quite as well in translation as it could. And so, my favorite nonfiction of the year was this book here, A Mesa com Frida Kahlo. It is a recipe book based on the life and the kitchen of artist Frida Kahlo. And obviously you can just look at how many notes I have here. When I arrived in Portugal, the thing that I missed more than American food was Mexican food. And I've since discovered some good Mexican food here, but I was really craving it, and then I saw this book, and I've been making recipes out of it and loving it. Plus, I just love Frida Kahlo. She is my favorite artist by far. So that was my favorite nonfiction. I think the top of the list, and I have no idea where it got off to, so I won't be able to show you, but I will put a picture up of the cover, was at some point I picked up a used copy of A Dama de Espada by Pushkin. That, like I say, I just found it at random. It's The Queen of Spades in English. It's a novella. It's not long, not that difficult, but it was so good that I nearly started learning Russian for a while because I want to read that someday in Russian. So that was my 2022 in reading. I hope your year of reading went as well as mine did, and that you also discovered some great books. So what about 2023? Well, I want to read even more. But I'm hesitant to increase the goal too much because I have a lot going on in my life right now, and so I don't want to make over promises. I'd also like to broaden my languages a bit. So I didn't read anything in Esperanto this year, and my Esperanto is getting rusty, so I need to get back to it. I'd like to read a little more in Spanish because that's another language that's kind of on the back burner. I had intended to read at least some really simple, either children's books or graded readers in Chinese, and I'd started one, but I didn't get through it. So I think my goal for next year is to read 3 books a month of any length, because some of these might be short. 1 at least in English, 1 at least in Portuguese, and 1 in some other language. And that's what I'm going to shoot for. So we'll see how it goes. So that's my rundown of the year. Happy New Year if you're seeing this before the new year, or I hope it was a Happy New Year if you're seeing this after. And I hope you like and subscribe and join the community, and we can read some good books together. See you next time.